Today's topic is about retention and graduation. And actually, I'll say a little bit more quickly about the Academic Affairs Forum, opportunity for discussion, just in case you can't get enough just being discussion here. You can go to the website. We created a website so that faculty can continue to give input on these issues. We actually received a handful after the last one. Very helpful. People put their thoughts down on that. I'm hoping this initiates some campus-wide attention to things we can do to improve our retention rates and the graduation rates amongst students. You will note that there's a gentleman with a camera there, and so this is being recorded. So as I said last time, be careful what you say. You don't want to go viral. You want to be, so what a polite civil discourse we have here at University of Maine. Well, our intent then would be to post this on the website so the people who couldn't be here but can't get enough of this kind of discussion would be able to observe the video and submit their thoughts or input. This is the second in a series. The third one we've got scheduled for April Fool's Day, and the tentative topic on that one is going to be about graduate education and research. And we're kind of focusing up, within that what we're going to sort of have a discussion about. Harlan and I talked about this morning. This is sort of a, if you will, a co-production of the Provost Office and the Faculty Senate. I want to thank Harlan for his collaboration on this. We'll follow a similar format to what we did in the first one of these. I'm going to provide you with sort of an overview and some background information. Then I'll invite Harlan to share some thoughts that came out of the Faculty Senate Executive Committee. And then we'll just have open for discussion. Again, the point of these meetings really, primarily for me, even though I'm going to spend some time sharing some information with you, the rest of the time really is to listen and to gather information from the faculty. We're putting together, as I'll outline in a moment, we've got a plan to develop an action plan to address improving retention rates and graduation rates. So, we'll start with the Blue Sky Plan. In the Blue Sky Plan on Pathway 2, we have as one of our goals to improve annual student retention rate by 5% and improve 4- and 6-year graduation rate by 10%. So as I said last time, some attention to these strategies was paid last year in the pathway groups. And this year, responsibility for carrying forward the various strategic initiatives in the Blue Sky Plan has been dispersed amongst the vice presidents. And so I'm responsible for some, Robert's responsible for some, each of us have some. And the focus on retention and graduation rates is an area that I'm responsible for drawing attention to. So I didn't become an administrator yesterday, so I know the first thing you do when you have something is you form a committee. So that's what I did. Let's do step back. So this is the advisory group. I asked people to work with me to serve as an advisory, to look over what we are doing here at the university and help us develop a plan on how to move forward. You can see the folks, I won't read them all out to you, but it's a mixture of faculty and administrators who are paying some attention to this. We started meeting at the end of last semester. We meet about once a month. We will continue through this semester. But the charge for this group is we want to be data informed. We don't we'll want to develop a plan just based on what we think or a notion about what we think might work to improve our retention rates. We want to look at what we know about, both we within the university know about what we're doing and what seems to be working or not working. And we want to look at the broader we, what in higher education, what is known, and how we can take that information and apply to UMaine. So we're going to do, we are in the process actually right now of doing a pretty systematic look at the best practices in higher education. The next thing we'll be doing, and we're in the process of actually, is taking an inventory of the University of Maine practices. What are the things that we are doing here on campus right now that are focused on retaining students and or helping them move toward graduation. After that, later this semester, we're going to do our own sort of comparison of what are we doing here at UMaine, what does the literature say about best practices. I can give you a preview. We're doing pretty well, actually, in terms of the things that we do, but there are areas where our efforts are inconsistent, and there are areas where there are clear things that we can do to be more successful, I think. The approach that we eventually want to take is look at this as a multifaceted area. We'll look within departments, within colleges. We'll look at how enrollment management plays a role in this, both in terms of admission, in terms of how we use financial aid. And then we'll look at of course, student services and how outside of the academic realm, what are the things we're doing to help our students form a commitment to the University of Maine and to succeed while they're here. And what I've charged this advisory group with doing is developing, I'm not going to even call it a report, we're not looking for a whole narrative discourse about this, but an action plan. And the goal is to have an action plan by June so that we're ready for next fall to implement the ideas that we've come up with. Okay. So that's a quick overview. There are other folks helping out with this. So as part of this work, you saw that Jeff St. John is part of the advisory group, the advisory team on this. Jeff is also then working with a group of associate deans and others to look at, their charge is really looking inward at UMaine and what are we doing across the various colleges to help to gather that information and feed it up to the advisory group. So, I want to start with just a few comments about where we are at the baseline, right? So, looking at the University of Maine and how do we do right now in terms of how well we retain students and move them on to graduation. So these are our data. This is, I believe Ted told me these are 5-year average data. We keep about 78% of students from first year to second year. So when we talk about retention, I'm going to use the term several times. And I'm always referring to it in the same way, retention from first to second year. That's a common metric that's used across higher ed. And then the graduation within 4 years and the graduation within 6 years. So we graduate about a third, a little more than a third of our students in 4 years and then not quite 60% in 6 years. Of course, we're all good academics here, and we know that those numbers don't mean much unless you have something to compare them to. So we can look at different comparison groups. And these, so at the top, you'll notice this is from the Consortium for Student Retention Data Exchange. Ted Coladarchi got these together for us. So there's our statistics. One comparison group is what they refer to as selective public institutions. So these are public universities. I asked Ted, what does selective mean? It has to do with, the operational definition has to do with SAT range of your students. So we would be considered a selective public institution. So of that broader group, how do we compare? We actually look good, fair. You know, we're doing just as well in terms of retention, slightly better in terms of graduation. You can look at doctoral research intensive or doctoral research extensive. If we look at the research intensive, we're again doing well, maybe a little bit better. If we look at the extensive, we're a little bit behind, so that might be considered aspirational. We actually, on this consortium data, we are currently ranked as research extensive. So by that measure, we're somewhat behind our peers. But I will say, if you look at the operational definition of intensive versus extensive, we've just introduced intensive, so it's not that far.
Is the number only for undergraduate?
Sorry, these data are undergraduate only. If you're interested in a more complicated picture, we'll look at graduate.
What is that line, intensive, extensive?
I can't tell you specifically. I know the two big factors they look at is PhD production and research expenditures, research productivity. It's actually not only expenditure, research productivity in a variety of ways. What Ted said to me is that we have, if you look back over the years, we've been intensive, extensive, we currently extensive. And that is different than the Carnegie classification, just to make it more confusing. That used to be the phrases that Carnegie used. They stopped using that now. There's our research, I don't know if it was medium, but it was high, very high, and we're at high, and we would aspire to be in the very high category. Okay, so the way I read these is that we do fairly well compared to our peers. We look at with other research universities, we would aspire to improve by again, sort of the range that appears in the Blue Sky Plan, about 5 to 10%. You can look at different other peer groups, and again, just to give you, so there we are at top again. If you may remember, NCND stands for New Challenges, New Directions. Back when that was the University Maine System had this task force to look at that. That was about 5, 6 years ago. They identified what they thought were our peer land-grant institutions, which were land-grant institutions in rural states like Wyoming, North Dakota State, I think, Montana State, I think, is in there. So if we look at us compared to those, we do well. If you look compared to any of the other 6 University Maine System campuses, we do very well. If we look compared to the other New England land grants, again, we would be below them. We're not performing at a level comparison to UNH or the other New England land grants. So we would say, well, how do we do? Well, depends on how you compare us. We do all right. Our retention is not, not something to be embarrassed about. It's not bad. But clearly there is room for us to improve compared to our peer group, or particularly our aspirational peer groups, the institutions we would most like to be compared to. So let me just also then share just a little bit about what we're finding, and I'll thank Robert Dana for this, for helping us with literature on retention. The advisory group has done some reading and looked at things, and again, this is a summary of ways to look at factors that are associated with retention. The one obvious one is how well prepared are the students, and that here across studies. And we of course have data on the names. I'll share some that Ted provided me with. So real quickly, this is where your high school ranking was, 4 being the best, and your SAT broken in quartile, 4 being the highest. And again, not surprisingly, as you move up into each section of this, the retention rates are higher and higher. So the students who are scoring the top quartile on the SAT and in the top 25% of their class, we're doing very well. If you move down to the students who are less well prepared, as your high school performance or your SAT scores might suggest, they present a challenge. Nothing surprising, but that is consistent with what's in the literature and consistent with what we find here at campus. So another factor that emerges very strongly is how well students do when they first get to university. Their first experiences. In fact, some of the things look at within their first 3 weeks or by the first month on campus. There are factors that would predict who's going to stay on for their second year and who's not, and who's going to move on to graduation. And again, I'll show you some data from UMaine, and again, very consistent with what's said in literature. This is your first semester GPA. And that's the rate at which they're retained at UMaine. So again, not surprising, the students who are got a first semester GPA above 3.5, we're keeping over 90% of them. And probably the other 7% have transferred to another university. And then of course, as you work your way down, it becomes even maybe more dramatic that the students who perform poorly in the first year cumulative don't come back. So again, nothing too earth-shattering here, but it is it's consistent with what other universities are finding, and it does suggest at least one has at least one implication for where we might focus some efforts, right, in that first semester to help the students to figure out how to be college students and to succeed. So there's those things. Now, the other factors I'm going to show you are, again, things that appear in the literature. I don't have clear data from UMaine, but again, one of the studies that, or one of the papers Robert gave us was a meta-analysis of several studies, and they grouped things together. It looked at what was associated with retention and graduation. And not surprisingly, again, students who either have or where they have interventions that have impacted these, what we would call academic readiness or academic related skills. Do they know how to study? Do they know how to manage their time? Do they have good study habits? That's associated with improved retention. Again, a related factor, how well do they feel they're going to do, the academic self-confidence. Although we have some interesting data about students and how grossly they overestimate how well they're going to do coming in. If you look within that first year at how students are feeling, not surprisingly, those that are feeling better about it, about themselves and feel they have what it takes, tend to succeed. As another factor, looking at how committed a student is to the goal of getting a degree. Students who come in undecided about a major, but particularly undecided about whether this is what they want to do more poorly. These kind of meta-analysis looked at studies that tried to intervene in that early, intervening with students early on to help them build a sense of what is their plan and why they should feel a sense of commitment to pursuing their degree. Their institution to the commitment, their commitment to the institution, Their commitment to the institution, that is, in our case, would be, I'm at UMaine, I feel good about UMaine, this is where I want to be. Again, early on, tends to be associated with better retention. Students who come and are at a university and are unclear if that's really the place they want to be, not surprisingly, have poor retention. And then their degree that they get involved in the community and in the social life of the university, their social life of their academic community tends to be associated with improved retention. And again, I would guess that none of these things are particularly shocking to you. But they're the kind of things that emerge in the literature. I'll just mention also that just looking at best practices, and I would say for this, this is kind of a combination of empirical, that is, there are studies showing that these things help with retention, but also opinion, that is, ratings by universities. Do you do these things? Do you think they help? Yes, I think it helps. So having an honors program or some type of program for academically accelerated or gifted students has a very positive impact, or has a positive impact on retention. By the converse, the programs that just mix those students up with the whole student body and don't challenge them in that way have poor retention with them. Having support services like writing programs, tutor programs, tends to be associated with improved retention. Programs that are focused on first-year students. We have the first-year student experience here, and within some units, within some colleges they have first-year experience, either courses, within some specific majors they do. Again, here's an area where I see your areas. There's some things we do broadly. Again, I think Robert Dana's shop does about having the first-year broad experience. Some units, I think, do spend a lot of time on their students, helping them build a sense of belonging to their unit. Others, less so. Programs that are targeted toward conditionally admitted students. Again, we have those here. Programs designed for at-risk students. We have some of that here as well. So actually, if I go through everything I've shown there, we have in one form or another at the university. And again, not completely consistent across areas, and there may be ways that we can improve upon them, but they do exist here. The use of a CRM, or customer relationship management system, is something that we don't have here. And this is really, it's a way of tracking students very early on. It's a way of tracking them from actually before they get here, identifying the students who are at risk, identifying, looking at their very early performance. Even can be things like, are they going to class over their first 2 to 3 weeks on campus, their performance on the first midterm, a variety of things that can be tracked. And of course, it's not only tracking them, but it's having an early warning system, a system that says, here's a student and these factors are popping up and showing that he or she's not attending class or they're not doing their assignments. And it's, of course, not only having the warning system and saying, oh shoot, it looks like we missed another one, but having something to follow that up, someone who reaches out to the student, some way of connecting with that student seems to be helpful. And there are now, of course, software programs that are designed for this, and the University of Maine system, in fact, is looking at one right now, and we're considering whether or not we'll participate in that starting next year. But a way of tracking students so that we can look at large numbers of students and have these factors pop out for us and see if we can develop intervention plans. Mandatory advising appears. Again, that's something that we do here. Another factor, or another thing that's common, considered best practices, is having students have some kind of experience. I use the word work broadly, but some kind of experience where they have experiential, hands-on type of learning related to their major. Seems to be associated with improved retention. And some universities have been doing this idea of these learning communities where students who share an interest live together. I would say our honors college is an example of a learning community. We have Colvin and we have Valentine, where the honors students live together. There's presentations in there. They're creating this idea of a learning community. So that's, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the kind of things that we're learning. Just to then go back, our intention is to gather this information. Jeff's group is doing this more systematic survey of what we're doing here at UMaine. We're going to try to do kind of a qualitative evaluation of what we're doing, looking at how this relates to how what we're doing relates to the factors that we think are associated with improved retention, and also then looking at what we're doing as it relates to best practices, and coming up with a series of actions that we'll take. Of course, what we'll need to do is look at, like everything else, this takes resources, and we'll figure out what the resources are, and whether or not, what we can afford to do and what we can't, and how to prioritize the various ways we might intervene. What is this? I'll stop there. So the next part really is to have a conversation. That's a quick overview. I thought I'd ask Harlan to come up and share a few words about a proposal that came out of the Faculty Senate, and then really we can have a conversation, any thoughts you have about what we might consider doing, or questions about what we could do differently.
Thanks, Jeff. Again, for those of you that weren't at the last faculty forum, the Faculty Senate was very interested in participating in the Blue Sky Initiative, so we looked through all the kind of opportunities within the Blue Sky, and then identified those which were of highest priority to faculty and students on improving the climate at the University of Maine. And again, one of them there were actually 7 proposals, very specific proposals that we put forth through the Blue Sky Initiative, through the various pathway committees for consideration by the university. And this one did pop up as one of those top priorities that faculty were interested in being engaged in and participating in. So some of the highlights, I guess, of our initial analysis, again, over a year ago now, when we came up with the report after that assessment, was one of the points that we noticed was that for the last 25 years, the overall retention and graduation rates at the University of Maine have typically varied approximately in those numbers that you looked at, plus or minus 2%. So if our goal is to go up 5% or 10%, We're talking about something very significant, something different than we've been doing for the last 25 years is what we're talking about. So again, our intent was it's got to be something bold. We've got to redo our thinking on this campus. It can't be the same old, same old. Let's see. Another thing that we came to a conclusion with right away is when we started looking at these rates, retention rates, graduation rates, we noticed that they are all kind of normed out for the university. They're not appropriate or even relevant if you're measuring, let's say, down at the unit level. And of course, most faculty members were concerned with the unit level. It's the unit level where we believe you can have the greatest impact on retention, the greatest impact on encouraging students through to graduation. If you don't have faculty in this equation. Now you could look at most of these things that Jeff just brought up as being primarily managed and led by administrators, or you could look at them as managed or led by involved and interested faculty in moving things forward. Obviously, it should be a partnership between all of those types of initiatives. So what we concluded was we need a better surrogate measure. If we were actually going to provide, and one of the core concepts that we were trying to propose here is let's provide some kind of incentive for faculty. We came up with a very specific proposal for engaging faculty in units to increase their retention and graduation rates, right? Now, normally on the campus, of course, the joke is that what do you get when you double the number of your students? Well, you get double the number of your students, and it's just a bigger load on your
Twice as much work, yeah.
Yeah, just twice as much work and not necessarily any reward. So can we actually provide an incentive that would engage us all and say, hey, we really do want to double the size because that's going to help us. We'll be able to afford more graduate students or something along those lines where we actually have some substantial benefit. Not necessarily salary benefit or anything like that, but simply maybe more operating budget, let's say, for the particular unit. Okay, so that was a core thing, but that means that we need a different surrogate measure for it's very difficult when you get to these numbers and talk to Ted. These are complex numbers that very difficult. The reason we don't have better numbers or a surrogate, the direct measure for students that are starting in your program and then they transfer out, well, as long as they transfer out to another unit, the university doesn't care, right? Because you haven't lost that student. But if you lose 90% of your students from your particular class, it really doesn't affect your retention or your retention rate within your particular program, right? Because that's not a measure. Or if you get double the number of students that transfer in as compared to the number that you had, again, that's not reflected because it's all based upon the number that entered, okay? So we need a better kind of surrogate over those coming in and who graduates 4, 5, 6 years later out of your particular unit. Very difficult to measure, but I think we could come up with, if you were going to come up with an incentive for units and faculty to actually enhance and increase the numbers of students getting all the way through to graduation, then we should come up with some type of surrogate number. If we're going to do something along the lines that the faculty was suggesting, then it should be open to everybody on campus, although not every unit would necessarily want to participate. Many units would say, we don't want to increase our, enrollments or our double our rates, or because we're already maxed out with the number of faculty that we have. So some of the other folks that that might want to participate, fine, but the opportunity should be there for everyone, and not everyone would necessarily, not all units would necessarily take advantage of it. The other, of course, is we're always interested in if there were going to be some type of incentive program, it should be transparent, it should be automatically correcting. If you have great increases, yes, you get rewards, but if you get decreases, well, then you lose that additional benefit and kind of immediate and reactive, readily computable. Okay, and I guess our overall perspective is that carrots work better than sticks, and let's entice and encourage and engage folks to participate as opposed to thou shalt do, and let's enhance communication among all of us in this particular process. I'm not going to go through the particular proposal. I don't think it's a very good proposal, even though I helped write it, but I think the whole concept of incentivizing units, incentivizing faculty, getting people that really want to, this isn't just going to increase work, but it's really going to help us with our alumni. It's going to help get our students through to graduation. And I'll just say from my own unit's perspective, I've noticed within a very short period of time, if faculty and administrators down at that unit level, if they care, if they simply pay attention, track, do things like mandatory interviews, pay attention to your students, it makes a world of a difference in just bringing students on from one year to the next to the next. And I think, again, a lot of these things that we could view as a campus-wide program, in many times should be implemented down there at the, has to be at the human level, at the faculty level,
Yeah.
at the student level.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Right.
I will say, and I agree, that's the challenge, is to figure out how to do that. Because as you said, and as a lot of this literature shows, that kind of simple touch, that sort of reaching out and touching, how you doing, you didn't come to class, matters. And then, but you do that up to scale, and it takes a lot of time. How do you figure out ways, not just to say, hey, please do that, but how do you figure out ways to incentivize that? It's challenging. I'm glad to hear your comments about the specifics of your proposal, so we don't have to get into those. But it is, but I think grappling with it, figuring out how you do that, because you don't want to penalize a student, from my point of view, for changing majors. That's not necessarily a negative thing. It's part of the educational process. How do you figure out a system that doesn't penalize units for students transferring out and stuff?
Or reward those that get 5 times as many
Yeah.
transfer in
Yeah.
because we're a phenomenal program, that type of thing. It is, it's controversial in this perspective. So it's controversial, but we all know that if we were all much more encouraging and paid much more attention, and we probably could substantially increase our retention. Getting these folks out at the end, getting them out after 4 years, at 4.5 years, if we could do that, it
Yeah.
would be. And that sometimes needs some leading students through the process. And if you hold their hand a bit, I think it's better for them. They're not spending as much money, and we can get them out. They're happier. We have happier alumni.
Yeah.
That comes.
Oh, Mike.
I'm just wondering if the committee has or might consider a particular crunch point that I sort of suspected may contribute to some of these problems.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to be one of the big issues that has sort of knock-on effects in almost all dimensions here is a system that requires students, when they have a problem in one of their early intro courses, is to fully retake an entire course. It adds the extra expense,
Yeah.
it lengthens their whole period. It's sort of demoralizing when it's a required course earlier in your program, and you already know you're
already behind.
you're down a bit from that, and then you've got to sit through the entire course again down the road. All those sort of things seem like that's a system that really must play a big impact on the students, and maybe some ways to look at analyses here to see if that is an issue. Are we really having cases where students that are failing in, those core courses for new majors, is that doing it? And are there ways that, rather that a different system could help them to remediate that
Right.
early experience, pick up the information they need so that they can move on more readily,
Right.
more efficiently. And the flip side of it is, it helps us in the sense that where a lot of us are up against right now is over-enrollment in many
Right.
of our intro courses.
Right.
Running students back through those courses
Does
another
not-
round just adds more to that issue as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Again, the specifics are hard to think through, but I agree with the point, because instead of just saying to the student, oh, sorry, next fall, I'll give it another shot, there are other things we can do.
But maybe there's ways to, for example, incentivize approaches in those courses for instructors to be able to provide other ways to test to ensure that
Yeah.
that student's got knowledge
Get to
from
the,
some key part of the class, so that.
the proficiency.
A proficiency
Yeah.
type assessment. They would need probably extra resources to be able to
Yeah.
do that,
Yeah.
in the loads they have.
Yeah, yeah.
That might be a way.
Yeah. But looking again at we can identify what are these courses, these high enrollment, relatively high dropout or high failure rate courses, and maybe develop something specifically for those. Yeah, Elliot, you would?
I was just going to respond to the idea of incentivizing students for staying in majors. You know, being in a unit that tends to be a portal for a lot of students coming into this university. They love high school biology and they think they want to go in that direction, and they get here and they find that there are many sub-disciplines in biology that are represented in other units, as well as discover other areas. And I think that that if we're doing, I feel like if we're doing a good job in our unit and we're directing students towards what they're going to succeed the best in, then that should be rewarded as well. So the idea of, I actually like the idea that we're looking at retention across the campus and not just within units. We can track enrollments in units that reflect also should be incentivized but relative to enrollments, and we do that both in terms of student credit hours and in our courses as well as our majors. But I just think that going to a system that rewards units for keeping students in the major is counterproductive to what we should be doing here at the university in terms of helping students to discover and identify what's going to lead to their best success.
I mean, if we could find some way to find, I don't know if it's, once students are in year 3 and have declared a major, then looking at some way of incentivizing the graduation rate. Like how well do we move, how well do we do in keeping them moving on toward graduation once they've reached that?
You mentioned under best practices programs for at-risk students, but didn't really identify that as to what categories would be considered at risk. I'm thinking, for example, of students who are low-income, Pell Grant eligible, or Pell Grant recipients. I suspect a fair percentage of our loss of students may be just that they feel they can't afford to stay in college, that they don't have the money to finance their educations, and that would be related to some of these financial indicators like Pell Grant eligibility. So I'd like to suggest that you look at that particular population. I'm thinking also along the same kind of line of issues around low income, students who maybe come from schools that have a lot of low income students as measured by free and reduced lunch rates. Those schools very often don't have the resources that more affluent schools do, so they may not be able to provide as high a quality academic preparation. So those students might be considered at risk as well. Students who are underrepresented, whether it's race, ethnicity, or other measures of diversity, may also be at risk. I didn't see those kinds of data in your presentation, and I'm wondering if anybody's done that, and if so, what you might have found.
Yeah. I can't speak to what we've done so far here to break those things down. I know we're going to look at, you mentioned the Pell Grant, and that is something that Ted and I have already started to talk about, partly motivated by federal government. You've probably seen President Obama's proposal about ratings of universities, and while we haven't seen exactly what the ratings will be, the things discussions I've participated in or things I've read suggest that your performance with Pell Grant recipients would be one of the indicators. Because of course, if you just look at graduation rates, and you saw those slides about academic preparation, your exclusive private schools, particularly private, but could be public, are going to outperform students who take universities that take a wider breadth. And so they're trying to look at ways to look at how do universities perform with example you gave, Pell Grant recipients. So that is one area we will be looking at. How do we track our Pell Grant students? How are we doing with respect to retention? I don't know what we'll find, but then we can look at what are the factors that we think will be associated with improving that retention level. There are a variety of programs, of course, for underrepresented students that Student Affairs does,
Multicultural.
yeah,
student
et cetera.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure we have data on those, Robert.
We do, we have a program called the Unum Leaders, we have the Multicultural Student Affairs Office, the LGBT Office, the Office of Veterans, non-traditional commuting students, all special programs for students who are known to be at high risk for a lot of different, at the level of a lot of different risk factors. And it's getting more and more clear to us that some management of the population, usually with people reasonably close to their age, but who guide them and support them, yields very positive outcomes for relatively little money. But they do need a hand-holding and sort of, you know, how do you get referred to the right place? Who do you ask for the problem resolution? How do you get to the financial aid office? Sometimes the tipping point is so, you know, a lot of faculty or staff would look and say, well, it's nothing. The problem is, you know, irrelevant. And in fact, it's the thing that just tips people over the edge, and it can just be a tiny thing. So more hands-on, and our Unum Leaders program, where we pick students who are at high risk, give them a mentor and a peer group. We wanted to take them from 60% retention rate, which is very low, to the average of the university, 78. And we replicated for 2 years now at 87% retention rate. And that's just putting your arms around them and saying, you know, we'll sort of walk with you. Because most people want to succeed, and they all expect to succeed, but sometimes just a little bump.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. And people don't like that in institutions like this. They say, well, there should be some survival of the fittest, and I mean, it can't be, not in a public place like this.
Yeah. Well, if we did the analysis by the kinds of subgroups that I indicated, we might discover that, gee, we're doing a great job
Right.
In some cases,
with
yeah.
these populations based on the kinds of things that Robert just outlined. Or we might discover that, gee, despite our best efforts,
Right.
the data don't look so good. We've got to do something else.
Right. And that's part of what I was alluding to, but our challenge will be resource allocation. If we want to evaluate the things that we're doing, the things that we may be doing that we all love, but the data may show it doesn't matter, and so we may want to redirect our resources. So that's part of the
We'll give you a little
task.
example of that, and I won't tell you the program, but we redirected $40,000 to an innovative program for a very high-risk group. The outcome was great. We took the money away. It was like the bottom fell out almost immediately. So we don't have the money for it. I'm looking for the money, but you're right. I think
You
some
know that
places,
matters.
right? Yeah, I think in some cases we're just not doing enough for long enough.
Francois.
I guess I just wanted to sort of look at the math questions here, because I noticed in the very first slide you had this sort of 5% and 10% targets. And I guess I just wanted to make sure that as things go forward and you sort of firm up those kinds of targets and goals for a program like this over a couple of years, that those two things they could even conceivably be inconsistent with each other. So for example, if I look at the research extensive numbers, you had 86% in that first number, which is an 8%, or yeah, 8%
Yep.
higher than us, and yet they only had a 10% higher in that final number. So the targets may not be quite the right targets to be consistent with each other. So I realize lots of things can
Yep.
affect both those
Yep.
numbers, but there may be sort of some pure statistical things that need to be looked at to make sure you're not saying, well, if I get 5% here,
Oh,
there's
right.
no way I'm gonna
I
get
follow your
10%
point. Yeah,
there,
of course,
right?
yeah,
That sort
that's
of
right.
thing. So,
Yeah.
so.
No,
so those
exactly.
kinds
We'll
of
look at it as
issues-
different issues, the retention issue and the graduation issue.
Yeah.
And some of the factors are the same, some will be different.
And which one, in some sense, is the true bottom line? I guess
You're
is-
asking me to
is
tell
my
me.
que-
Is
I'm
that
quest-
an
I'm
open
asking.
rhetorical question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean,
I don't know.
What we do though, Jeff and I went to the APLU meeting where Theo has some data about this. The number of people who leave, that 12%, or this past year was 10%, but the number that leave, a substantial proportion of them go elsewhere. it's not like they're gonna leave. And so a different question is retention aid, political, financial concern, or is it a student ethical, because I was really taking that.
So is that, there's something that the APLU is promoting called SAM. I can't remember what it stands for. Anyway, it's a great acronym for something, but, and we're looking into participating. And so we participate, in theory, with the other APLUs. They're trying to get all the APLUs, the American Public Land Grant University Association. If we get the land grant universities to all participate, we'll see, we'll get data to say, well, yeah, only the University of Maine has a 6-year graduation rate of 60% of graduating from UMaine. But maybe our true graduation rate is 75 or 80%, students who transfer to other institutions and finish within 6 years.
How was that on?
What's that?
How was that our graduation rate if they graduated?
Well, students who start here, but my point is that, and the APLU's point, so you back me up, is that to view that University of Maine lost that student, that's a failure, and it may in fact not be a failure. That the student says, wow, I've studied this and this, and if I transfer there, I can really pursue what I want to do. That is a negative for the University of Maine, but not necessarily for the students. So the APLU's point is to look at, graduation rates, more broadly. So it is an interesting thing to say, if 75% of students who start at UMaine get a college degree within 6 years, that is, as opposed to another institution where only 40% get a college degree within 6 years, that is an interesting thing about University of Maine, as opposed to the institution that doesn't have that rate, even if it doesn't come from our institution. You look skeptical, but you often do, Dick, so I'll let you think about it. Next.
Is there a timeline associated with the 5 and 10%?
2017 is what the goal is, by 2017. I mean, we've already bumped up 4%, I think, or 5% from last year in retention, but, everyone who took intro stats knows that these things go up and down, even though we're laying claim to it. Yeah.
What do the data say about associations or correlations between retention rates and full-time instruction?
I don't know data on that. No.
I mean, I saw a study dated a few years ago that there's an obvious and inverse relationship. The more likely you are to be taught by a part-time faculty member, the less likely you're to stay, which might help explain why community colleges have a retention rate of 12 or 14%, et cetera.
Right.
And, but clearly, the first-time student experience at UMaine and many other research institutions is that you're one of 300 or 400 students in a big psychology class, one of 75, 80 students in a math class. If you're in a small class, like first-year composition, you've got a 98% chance of being taught by an adjunct or an assistant. So there's really not going to be a whole lot of faculty intervention, and you're creating, a not particularly good experience for the students.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question to figure out. I mean, one, if you can find that article, if you send it to me, that'd be great, because we do want to look at that. And then two, get us to think about how we do organize our instruction. We use the psych example, and maybe we should rethink that. Maybe we should, I don't know, either put our very best professors in the classroom and do some things. I mean, they're already trying to do some innovative things. I see Mike, like they are trying to have discussion sections for, for right now I think the sections are 350, but discussion sections of 25 out of that. But it's primarily graduate students, in fact not primarily, it's all graduate students who are leading those. And whether or not it would be worthwhile to introduce some faculty. I don't know, it's an interesting question.
We'd have to hire some faculty.
Or go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention the program that you may be aware of in InBio with
Right.
the synapse,
Right.
which is used to track the performance of students in
Right.
Bio 100 as well as some of the other intro classes. And at-risk students are identified in their poor performance by poor performance on their first exam, and that automatically triggers contact with tutor center, as well as encouraging them to take advantage of coaching by MLAs, the Maine Learning Assistants, with the other undergraduates. And preliminary data from that over this last year is that those students who take advantage of the main learning assistance score a grade higher than the ones who don't follow up. So, and that is a relatively small investment
Right.
relative to the main learning assistance program, having the upper level undergraduates help in these large lower level classes to work as tutors.
Yeah. I think that's a great example of an early warning system, and then also using what resources that we have here in productive ways. So the MLAs get a good experience, being a tutor, and the students are benefiting. Yeah, I think that's a great.
I will mention, though, that it's a constant battle to get support.
Well, it is, and again, no.
For the Synapse program and our whole running operation,
Yeah.
and so that's a frustration because we've got something that is working, but
No,
we're battling to get
Right.
support for
It's
it.
a great point, because the question then becomes, okay, so again, to give the kind of counterpoint, yeah, so here is something that's working. Is this the best way to do it, to have a homegrown system? There are lots of companies now that are producing these. Is it cheaper, better to bring to scale with a company? How do we use our limited resources in the best way? So that is something that they're looking at with this CRM program that the system is looking at, and whether or not we want to try to adopt that here. But I mean, it's not to be argue your point. You're absolutely right. If we're going to do these things, we've got to figure out how to get the resources to do them, and where those resources will come from, and et cetera, et cetera. So, Al.
I was going to put a pitch in for the CRM system, whether it's Synapse or something else. What it'll do is help coordinate a lot of resources
Yeah.
across campus.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think we're going to get there unless we get that type of system and fund it and have the resources devoted to it.
I tend to agree. Hey, Greg, you have please.
I was thinking, just in terms of retention, are there any differences between those that come in undeclared and stay undeclared towards the end of their first year versus those that even switch majors in their first year that shows they're actively engaged with
Yeah.
what they want to do?
Yeah, so we've been trying to tease those data apart, and I didn't bring it with us, but Ted recently has broken some of it down. It's actually kind of, I think, an interesting story, so if I can relay it accurately. The way the data look, so we have the Foundations program and Explorations program. And Explorations, students get into Explorations in a variety of ways. We also have undeclared students in the College of Arts and Sciences. We have undeclared students in NSFA. I think we have undeclared in engineering. So those students are similar and dissimilar from each other in a variety of ways. So we've tried to break down systematically. So one recent analysis Ted did was students who are in Explorations, I believe, who applied for Explorations. They're self-declared, I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to do something students, versus students who are redirected to Explorations. That is, they don't have the background to get into the major they want to get into, and they're redirected to Explorations. Not surprisingly, when you break those students down apart that way, they look differently in terms of their academic preparation, and their retention rates are different. The students who come in undeclared and are interested in exploring tend to actually have quite good retention rates. So we tried to explain something that I need PowerPoint to break down, but that way of slicing the data apart is, I think, something that we want to look at, because I think you're absolutely right. Broadly, when we look in the literature, it says is that the sooner a student figures out what he or she wants to do, the better it is in terms of retention and graduation. And so it's that thing of the student who comes in saying, I don't know, but I'm interested in help me find, versus the student says, I want to do this, but I can't, so I don't know what I'll do. They don't do as well in terms of retention and graduation. Now, part of it, I thought we were bringing these conversations just to try to rethink what do we do. We break these students down in different ways. How do we reorganize how do we set up their curricula that matches where they are? How do we do advising for them? And I know you do something. Pat.
I'd just like to underscore what you just said. We followed the students in our stretch program, the 2-semester version of English 101. We tracked Explorations, Foundations, and mainstream students who had chosen the 2-semester course. Exploration students did better even than mainstream students. both in grades and in retention. Foundation students did not do quite as well. But as far as we can tell, there's a significant difference between explorations and foundations. I've taught Stretch now a year and a half. The exploration students are great. You know, they're just interested in stuff. They want to try new things. They'll do whatever. Foundation students, I'll just say this one more thing. The foundation students, it follows very closely, I think, what you're saying. It's not that they aren't bright, and I don't even know what that means exactly, but they are not socialized exactly. They don't know what it means to keep up with homework. They don't know what it means to make an appointment to see the teacher. They don't know all kinds of just, you know, very, very essential things. They can learn them some, but it, you know, it takes a lot of time. And maybe that's the last point I want to make, just from working with Stretch for a year and a half now. If it's true that we need a 5% difference, then we've really got to think about faculty time. You know, I've discovered that you really work with a foundation student to email them and say the paper is still not, you know, where it needs to be. We've got to talk about this. You've got to do another, whatever it takes is huge. I mean, it really, really takes a lot of time. I think there's a payoff, but it's not insignificant.
So again, to blend your point with Dick's, I mean, we do have to think about that, and obviously, not that I want to get us off on the wrong track, but the faculty resource is a challenging one at the moment. And so we need to think about what are the best ways to do this. I think it's some parts of the puzzle here are better addressed, in my opinion, by professional counselors, people who are advisors who are, you know, this is what they do, and some pieces are better addressed through faculty. And trying to tease that apart, I think it makes sense. We've got this, you know, pilot program, or the College of Arts and Sciences has a pilot program that they got through a preview grant from the president. We brought on a professional advisor, John Machetta, and you know, I think really positive things are happening over there as a result of that. You have someone who can reach out to those students who, again, I'll reflect back in my advising days when I had 45 to 50 undergraduate psychology majors as my advisor, and the one who came in and said, well, I'm a psych major, but I really don't know what I want to do. I said, well, okay, pick this, I'll see you. As opposed to the student says, wow, I'm a psych major, I think I might want to get a PhD, and I spend a half an hour with them, right? I thought of myself as pretty good with the latter student, and I'm pretty terrible with the first student. Is there, you know, should we be finding people who are good with those kind of students and matching them up? Okay.
I'd like to make 2 points. The first one is for the first year students, they don't have not much of opportunity to access to the professors, the faculty in that particular units, because they're busy taking the foundation courses. And then I think in order to retain the students in your major, you've got to provide opportunities and inspiration to tell them about your field. For us, I think it's marine science, and we try to address that, use various methods. One is FA 117 required in the past, and Wage was in charge. Now we're getting more and more different faculty rotate through, and on maybe weekly basis tell them about different opportunities and the research programs they do. And I think that's very important. Let the first year students to meet your faculty in your unit. That's very important. As the team building is also important. Bring them to the field trip, and we do this. We start learning from the SBE. We bring them to the dining center, spend the weekend, even before they start.
Yeah.
We start doing that in August now. I think it's a tremendous value to retention. The second point I'd like to make, I think, is that a inflexibility of different units, your curriculum. And I think Mike touched on that. If you fail the one intro course, you have to retake it.
Yeah.
And the consequences is a prerequisite. And you create a chain reaction, and then I think this can be addressed at a different level, at the uni level, most importantly, at the college level, that look at the different units, what is their basic requirements, the science requirements, whether it's Pell 100 or SMS 100, whether they can substitute to each other, equivalent to each other. At the college level, when they transfer students from one unit to the other, at least within the college, I think we can address that, and that will increase your graduation rate overall. I think this is very important to look at that, inflexibility
Yeah.
of the different curriculum within the units and also within the college.
Couple of things we're doing. One is, again, with enrollment management, we are trying to look at financial aid across the 4 years, not only as to get them in the door, but how do we use it to retain students, well, that's an issue. And then the other one, which I think is not popular in some quarters, but I'll talk about it anyway, we are looking at a company, a software group called InfoSylum, to help us look at actually the schedule and how we build the schedule across the campus to minimize the amount of conflicting time. That's an issue for some areas. I have to take this course. It's the one required in my major. I've got to move it ahead. I also have to take this course. They're both offered on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9:45, whatever the popular time is. The InfoSylum to get us to spread our schedule out in a more logical way.
And it's likely this exacerbates problems with belongingness for relatively low-income students as well.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, Fred?
I wanted to take up a topic that Harlan mentioned about, I think he was making the argument that a lot of the effective work with retention and graduation could be at the unit level because they know the situation better. And I'm speaking a little bit from my experience as a chair in the past of a unit. I find the numbers for retention and the graduation rates very unuseful. I can't really go to a faculty and say, we need to do something, because we all sort of know there's lots of information underneath that number, as we've heard people talk about. People transfer away, they may graduate out of somewhere else, they may leave. And you would think we would kind of know that, but since we're really talking about first-year students and they get divvied up among advisors, really, a lot of faculty never even meet some of these students before they go on their way. And I think that, the faculty said I worked with, I think if we had good information where we could say, this is what's going on, there's an opportunity here, I think they might have been willing to say, we're willing to commit our time to fixing that. But as long as it's just a number of 60%, with a lot of, we don't know what the real story is underneath that, getting people to have an intelligent discussion and make decisions about what to do, I think is nearly impossible.
Yeah, at the unit level. I mean,
It's almost like we had real data about what was happening through time. I think people are interested enough, dedicated enough to look for a solution.
Other thoughts or questions? Yeah, Ed.
Four-year graduation rates of 35% is not what we'd like to see. But the average University of Maine student doesn't take the number of credits that would get them to graduate, per semester that would allow them to graduate. So how do we address that issue? One possibility is that students pay a fixed rate and they can take as many courses as they would like or can handle, versus paying by the credit, and so they think they're cash strapped, so they actually pay more for their education by taking a longer time and paying extra semesters to live in a dorm or an apartment or pay extra student fees. We explored this opportunity as a way to impact retention and graduation rates.
I mean, I think you know the answer. It's not as systematically as we might. I mean, I know that the group of deans brought it to I was president for finance at one point in time and didn't get it. But there are other universities that have gone to that. I think it's reasonable for us that could be part of this group's work to look at, universities that have switched, what has happened, and the impact. Because you're right, you're not going to get to 120 at 13 credit hours a semester over 4 years. And that's about the average for our students. So that's a good point. Good point.
Yeah, just a comment. In civil engineering, we have pretty good graduation rates, retention rates, so on and so forth. Faculty do all they can. We have first-year student banquets, so on and so forth. But if I had to point to one person in my department that has more to do with that than anybody, it's probably our administrative assistant. All our students get an advisee. It's assigned the summer before they come. They may or may not contact you. But how many times does a student say, I can't find my advisor, and go to the front office?
Yeah.
How many times during ad drop period does a student say, I need to talk to the professor, I want to decide what to do with this class, where do I go? Where do they get that answer? Would it be valuable, and we're not going to tease that out of the data, how important those people are, but could there be something to help those folks with that task. I mean, we're lucky, we have a great one, but
Yeah, you do.
that may not be universal.
It's not universal. And that's, I mean, there's a lot of challenges in that. I mean, it occurs, organically for people like, it sounds like the AA in civil. It's not part of his or her job description. And then it is challenging if we make it that. If we now change it and we have union things to deal with and all that. So to me, that's a challenging one. How do you make that? Can we make it part of that job without professionalizing that job?
And it's a cultural thing in the department.
Yeah. I think again the comments I made earlier about trying to have some people who are professional who are that's their job. Like again, the model in the College of Arts and Sciences. Part of the job of the center there is that the student who wanders in, can't find their advisor, goes to the office of psychology or anthropology or wherever. I say, you know what, I can't find him either, but the advising center is open, it's open all day. I think they even have some evening hours. Here's the contact information, it's right over there in Stevens. To give those students something, because I think this model of a faculty mentor to a student is great and sounds great on paper, and when it works, it's beautiful. But we can't bring it to scale here. It's too big. I think we have to accept that. You can't expect a faculty member to have a close mentoring relationship with 30 to 50 undergraduate students in the semester. So then how do we make someone available or some resource available to them? And again, it sounds like in civil it became organically, your AA took on that role. Yeah. Let me go Alice first.
Back to Dean Ashworth's comment about four-year graduation rates. I think the other thing that isn't spoken in some of these conversations is how many of our students work.
Yeah.
And with the exuberance or idealism of a first-year student, they try and work 30 or 40 hours a week and yet carry a full-time schedule. And at some point, it all falls apart. They're not doing well in their courses because work always comes first. There's a time restriction or a commitment. They have to be somewhere at a certain time. And so I think we see a lot of students get into this graduation rate bind because they're not just coming here for 4 years to go to class. They're off campus for a significant amount of time with something that has a hook on their time. And they can't possibly take those 15 credits or 16 credits a semester to get through.
I mean, you're right.
How we deal with it, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I see two things. I mean, one, we get up there and get donors to give us a lot of scholarship money. And the other is we try to help students plan out a 5-year plan or a 6-year plan so that they're not crashing and, by default doing it in 6 years. But if you're going to try to work for 30 hours a week, maybe you start to think about college in 6 years, even though, for our data, it looks better if they do it in 4. But if it's realistic for the student, maybe that's the plan.
But they have that 4 years.
I know. But again, I'm thinking, what I'm suggesting is maybe it's part of our job to say, what, I don't think, I know you're ambitious, but it would take a super person to do what you've laid out here.
Your comment about getting donors is really to the point. Right now, the figure I heard was that 40%, 41% of tuition goes towards financial aid. 41% of every kid's tuition goes to financial aid to support other students. And of course, that financial aid is being used to piece off, to attract out-of-state students. They get discounted. So all that money was supposed to make from out-of-state students is not quite as much as it seems because we're giving them incentives to come here. The money is being used to attract honor students, okay? It's being used for athletes. So there's an awful lot of students who are subsidizing other students. So I think this does need to be reconfigured. Why not just cut the tuition rate by 41%?
I'm out of my league. I can't give you a good answer about what that would do.
Bravo.
Well, there's a model. I'll figure it out. But I can tell you that it's it is the way University Maine is not unique in that sense. We're not doing it. So, I mean, again, so if the implication is that somehow we've screwed up by doing this, well, so have 100 or maybe 1,000 or 5,000 other research universities.
Well, there's not much question about that.
Yeah.
So are you looking at data from the financial aid office?
Yeah,
To look
yeah,
at
yeah.
who's getting aid and is it going in the right places?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the answers yet, but we are, that's
Yeah.
part of the, you know, task we're taking on, is to try to look at how we're using financial aid and are we using it in the wisest way.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm seeing the same thing that other people have mentioned of students who are working 40-hour weeks and trying to be full-time students. Who
Yeah, I
are-
mean, our
who are
gap,
financially
yeah.
struggling, they don't have any other choice. If they're gonna stay at school at all, they have to have income. And I see students who are really struggling and asking for allowances in order to be able to get by. I have a student right now who, the only time that she can access the first class conference that's required for my course is when she's in class, because she can't afford to have a computer and internet access at home. I mean, there are people who are really struggling among our students, and we really need to take that seriously and figure out what we can do to help them.
Yeah, I mean, we're very aware that they call it the gap between our, you know, what our students can afford and what we can give is broader, bigger than it should be. It is part of what we are out there, you know, in terms of the kind of private giving and scholarship that efforts that we're trying to build. But it's, I mean, you're right. If you look at the endowment for the University of Maine, all between the foundation and other endowments is somewhere around 300 million. You know, and you compare it. I mean, you compare it to Bowdoin's, is, I just saw this recently, is $1 billion, and they can afford to provide a lot more financial aid. Even though their tuition's a lot higher, they can provide a lot more aid than we can. So it is part of the equation.
We have differences even within our own institution, among colleges having more scholarship, some colleges having more
Sure.
scholarship aid than others. In education, our graduates are not going into occupations that pay them really well. So our graduates are not coming back and saying, here's $1 million for scholarships. That's just not who our
Right.
people are.
Right.
And so we have students who are trying to get through an education degree in order to go into a relatively low-paid occupation, and we have no college-specific funds to support them relative to other colleges.
Very little, yeah.
And it's basic unfairness just within this campus.
Yeah, I'm not trying to use the word unfairness, but it's not distributed in an equal way. I mean, in terms of your definition of fairness, it would seem unfair to the engineering graduate who donated to the College of Engineering if we redirected that person's money to an education student.
Well, maybe we
but-
better make a stronger case to that engineering graduate that they wouldn't have gotten where they are if it hadn't been for having some good teachers when they were coming through K-12.
Mhm.
And that does matter.
Oh, no question, yeah. B.
We're working on building those relationships with the engineering, and so I think we're doing those things. And you're right, John, we definitely increase our efforts. My question, Jeff, was more on the CRMs.
Yeah.
So you said the system is taking a look at that?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm assuming that part of those packages would also include really good degree evaluations, and is part of the reason the system looking at it because of the transferability, or is it just?
Oh,
you're
no,
looking at it
the
investment?
system's looking at it because of, you know, economy of scale. I mean, is it, can we get a better deal if we bought for the entire system? I don't know about the degree piece. You're saying no?
I just was curious because it goes back to, in some ways, Ed's comments earlier. I think that when students can map out and see that the courses they're taking in a very clear way and how it leads to graduation, they become much more in tune with what it takes to get through in 4 years.
Mhm.
And you know, I do know there's systems and there's packages that really do those degree evaluations. It indicates, you know, kind of keeps you on track. I know we have do some of
Yeah,
that, some
yeah.
of our software does a little bit of that, but I don't think it's as good as it
Right,
could be.
Right, I agree with you, yeah.
I think that's part of this
I agree with
equation
you,
here,
yeah.
Jeff.
Yeah. Ed, did you have another comment?
I just wanted to address the point that, yes, there are differences among colleges in the size of the endowments, and I'm not ashamed of that difference. But people should know that the size of the amount of money spent on financial aid from the university versus from the colleges is much larger from the university. The playing field is a lot more even than one might look at by looking at the endowment portfolios.
That's a good point.
Is that data
Harlan.
available? Can you look at it?
I was,
I don't know that, because I've never seen that data.
Well, then how did you make the statement that it was unfair? So
Lots of.
41% was a number that was bandied about of the tuition revenue. You could look at that number compared to the endowment scholarship funds coming out of the University of
Yeah,
Maine
it's
Foundation.
a huge difference, yeah. Harlan?
I was just gonna get back to this issue of the option of having a fee for a full-time student and having much greater flexibility. I think students are much happier with that greater flexibility to add courses or take an overload of courses. We are, from my understanding, a rare exception to go kind of credit by credit by credit charging. The vast majority of universities across the country don't do that, so we're a bit of an anomaly, and I think there are real good reasons for allowing students to simply sign up as a full-time student. I remember I was the same way. I mean, I didn't have any money going to college, but I was rationalizing, okay, if I take a lot of courses, I can shorten my time in college. When I graduate, I'm gonna have a degree. I'm not gonna lose a whole year of a much higher paying job than the summer jobs I'm doing. And so I think students do rationalize, and we would increase our graduation rates here simply by that one step, moving them through in a more efficient process. So some students would choose to do that, others wouldn't. They would keep doing their part-time job. The other thing that I want to comment regarding this is I happen to have done a survey for the Alumni Association about a survey, and I happen to be the technical support person, so I got all these comments back from all these alumni, and I was flabbergasted at how many kind of ticked off alumni this particular university had. They went out of their way, since I was the contact person, to contact this person saying, I'm never gonna give a dime to the University of Maine. They never gave me a break for a single thing. I had to pay for every darn credit, for no flexibility back and forth. And I think just the psychological damage that does, if you want to talk about growing endowments in the future, you're not gonna do it with a bunch of unhappy people that felt like they had to struggle for every dime and pay for every little fee, and got nickel-dimed on their way through the process. So if we could simply give our students much greater flexibility, let them make their own decision and take a course overload, if they're willing to do it and work through it and live on pancakes or whatever, soup or whatever it happens to be to get through, I think psychologically we would be better off 5-10 years from now than the current system we have. So it's just not it's not a spreadsheet analysis. There's a lot more to it than simply looking at the spreadsheet on the economic ramifications of our current policy.
Al?
I was gonna say, I agree with you, Harlan, but what you find is we actually make money on the deal. Students at these other institutions, their average credit hours go up by about 1 credit. They still don't come up to the 15 semester credit hours. What it does is it dramatically advantages the better students, it disadvantages the poorer students, and we have a sizable population in that group which really cannot carry 15 credits.
Right. I mean, that's the challenge, is that student that Alice is talking about who needs to work 35 hours a week, well, only can feasibly take 12 credits.
But again, I had to work 35 hours a week. I mean, I didn't, I chose not to. I chose to get loans and do this quicker, okay? So there are, and I think, again, it's more a psychological issue to have the flexibility because, oh, it's harming our students. Well, in another way, it's not going to harm the university if they're much happier and have greater flexibility when they graduate. So I think it's
disagree
not
with you.
just.
I've made the same argument, I'm just saying there are consequences.
Right, right.
So did you have
There are counter arguments, but.
I was just gonna, I don't know if it's the number of that can do it, but one of the things we can do is, the reality is that we have students who need to work.
Yep.
And maybe at admissions, what we could do is model out for them what it's gonna look like. If you work 20 hours a week, this is what your degree is gonna look like, if you wanna succeed in your courses. If you wanna work 30 hours a week, this is what it's gonna look like for your graduation, if you wanna succeed at courses. But if you work 30 hours a week and you take 5 courses, this is what we can predict will happen.
Yeah.
And do that, and show that to them at admission and maybe throughout, so that they can make an informed decision.
That's
Is
good.
that being done right now? I don't know.
Well, to a certain extent, I mean, Ted's survey, or we survey them on, what do you think you're gonna get for grades? How many hours a week are you gonna study? And, I'm generalizing, but they say, like, I'm gonna study 10 hours a week, and I'm gonna get all A's. And so they have, I think, Robert, don't they do something in the orientation where they share those data with students and they show, and then so they do it on a broad scale, not on an individualized scale, but they do look at the relationship. Ethel, you're shaking your head.
Yes.
Sharing them to look at that, to try to educate them that their expectations about what's needed to perform at an adequate level at the university is likely different than what the expectation they're walking in with. So at the new student orientation and working with the foundations and exploration students, they do a fair amount of that. Not getting out of that fine-grained, your job, but at the broader level.
And share that information with the parents also.
Oh.
Very important that the parents understand what it's gonna take to be a successful student here.
Yeah, good. I actually have to be somewhere in 5 minutes, so I'm going to call it a meeting. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the input and the discussion. Thanks, Harlan.